All right, Brendan Taylor here, True School Sports. I'm with one of my good friends from across the pond, Punch Perfect Boxing. Good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me on, bro. Really appreciate it.
It's fantastic to have you on. It's been long overdue. I know, I went on your channel, I think, what was it, 2022 at some point? I can't remember the exact
Yeah, it was
month,
a
but it
while
was a
ago.
while ago. And I
Mm.
always said I'd have you on here. So I figure, we get the new year started off on the right foot and have you on here. So good to have you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, bro.
No, absolutely. But before we get into like the boxing talk, for people that are going to come across this video, Jamie, that maybe aren't familiar with your channel yet, could you tell them about like all the work you guys do, all the work you put on your channel, and just like I guess your background in the sport?
Yeah, absolutely. So Punch Perfect Boxing, I kind of mainly do sort of prediction videos nowadays. I used to do a lot more content, but I do a lot of stuff over on my Patreon as well. And that's mainly just because on my YouTube channel, I used to cover a lot of the lower weight classes and amateur boxing, but there's kind of a hardcore group that follow that. So I found that when I put it on Patreon, I got a bit more engagement. But on my YouTube channel, we do live streams every couple of weeks if there's a big fight coming up, and then mainly prediction videos. And if there's any big news or topics or whatever, we'll always jump on that as well. So yeah, Punch Perfect Boxing.
Okay. And as far as like your background in the sport, like how did you start this whole content creation thing? Did you grow up as a fan? Did you compete? Like, what was your background?
Yeah, mainly just a fan growing up. Like try competing, but also played football, which is obviously soccer to you guys. Played that at decent level, so that was always kind of my sort of hobby growing up. But boxing was just as a fan since I was a kid. Mayweather versus Hatton was kind of like the first big boxing event over here that really kind of took off and got media attention. People. I remember going into school and people talking about it, people's parents talking about it when we were going to football games and stuff. So that grabbed my interest, and then just from there, really, as I kind of grew up, realized that you could blog about boxing if you wanted to, you could write about boxing if you wanted to. And then kind of as sort of the pandemic and COVID hit, it was like, well, people don't really write about stuff anymore. They podcast about stuff or they make videos about stuff. So just kind of turned it into that really. So pretty much since I was like 15, 16, I've been doing something related to boxing. But as time's gone on, it's just kind of gone with the format that's current.
Okay, yeah. I think you're doing a really good job. I know,
Appreciate it.
the Patreon. I mean, I'm not subscribed to Patreon yet. I probably will at some point, but I know you do a lot of good work on there with the like you said, the amateur boxing and the Japanese boxing. But a lot of that's like this perfect segue, right? Because I mentioned Japanese boxing. You're probably the only person on YouTube, that speaks English that talks about Japanese boxing as much, if not more, than me. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the whole Naoya Inoue Marlon Tapales fight, and just like what do you think he goes from here? What did you make of all that?
Yeah, thought it was a solid performance from Inoue. Didn't think it was quite as devastating as we're used to seeing. I do think that perhaps just a little bit trigger happy at times. I think he thought that he'd just walk through to Parles, and it's kind of difficult for Inoue because he never really knows what reaction he's going to get. He never knows if he's going to hit someone and they're just going to fold right away. He doesn't know if he's going to hit someone and they're going to respond well to it. He's fought guys in the past that, someone like a Das Marinas that just went over right away. And then he hits someone like Depayen, who no one's got expectations for. And then he manages to hold up for a couple of rounds in there. I thought Tapales did well. He wasn't scared of Inoue. And I think a lot of guys, his last undisputed fight against Paul Butler, my fellow countryman, didn't do us proud, just went on the run for 12 rounds as much as he could. But I think that Tapales brought it. And once Inoue just composed himself a little bit like he needed to do, you just saw that the punch in power and the speed and the ferocity and the skills was just far too much for him.
No, 100%. I feel like in that fight he showed a bit more maturity. He's not, you don't normally see Inoue, hit somebody and they don't fall down. So I like the fact that somebody actually stood up to his power for a little bit. We got to see so that's something a bit different from the monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Tapales, credit to him, because like you say, people either get hit by him and they go down right away, or if they do get hit by him and don't go down, they at least go into their shell when they cower away and then make it difficult for Inoue. Tapales didn't do that, got put down in the fourth or fifth round and then was straight back up and looking to throw big shots. But it was one of those where the longer the fight went on, you could just see that Inoue just was going to have too much for him going into the back end of the fight.
Absolutely. And now he's undisputed once again, for the second time. I think it was 378 days, something like that. A lot of talks been going on about next year, what he's going to do, what's next for him. They're saying Merjan, they're saying Casimiro, Sam Goodman's name that's been thrown out there as well. But I wanted to ask you, Jamie, who do you think from 122 to featherweight, who would be someone or a couple guys that you think would give him the toughest challenge?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the toughest challenge, you probably look more towards featherweight because you just have the size factor and you don't really know, kind of how we would handle that. I mean, there's a lot of big guys at featherweight. Featherweight's got a weird division where there's these kind of, small, stocky guys like your Nick Balls and your Mauricio Laras, but then you get these tall, lanky, skinny guys like your Brandon Figueroas and your Rafael Espinoza, who's tall, rangy. So there's quite a mix at featherweight, which there isn't more so down at super bantamweight. I think it'll be interesting to see what he does because he's constantly just gone for the next goal. And it's kind of weird, right? Because he's gone to super bantamweight and he beat the best super bantamweight in the world in the first fight in Stephen Fulton. So then it's kind of like, well, what
What
do you do
now?
there? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what's next for him? But I still think there's actually not necessarily fights that he loses at super bantamweight because I think he beats everyone. But I still think there's guys there that if he was not the superstar that he is, but if he was just to fight a Lewis Neri, to fight MJ Akhmadliev, to fight those guys, you'd be like, that's a pretty damn good fight. And I like the Lewis Neri fight just because of the backstory. Obviously, Lewis Neri is very disliked over in Japan because of his backstory and stuff. So I think that fight's got a bit of needle to it. Lewis Neri said some things about Inoue's father in the past as well. So I think that brings out a side of Inoue that I think would make for a really interesting fight. And although Tapales beat MJ, it was a very close fight. It was a bad version of MJ. I think a better version of MJ would have got over the line against Tapales and probably gives Inoue something to think about at the very least.
Okay, and then I know they also have Casemiro. That's another one. I mean, I know Casemiro's a bit past it, but
Yeah.
Casemiro's the name they keep saying as well.
Yeah, that's more of a rivalry thing. Like Casemiro hasn't looked good in the last couple of years. He
No.
hasn't taken his career seriously. But because there's this rivalry and it was supposed to happen in the COVID year, and then obviously it got postponed and never got revisited after that. So I can see why they keep going back to it. But I think all of us kind of expect Inoue to win that very, very comfortably.
Yeah. I know I'm kind of hoping they don't reward MJ for the fight because I kind of feel some type of way about how MJ didn't fight Stephen Fulton when he had a chance to. I wish he would have fought Fulton. So I have my feelings about MJ, and I do think with MJ Akhmadaliev, like I personally, just me, I think he's a little overrated. That's just me though.
Yeah.
I would rather see Inoue fight Neri and just move up, but.
Yeah, and MJ, I have similar feelings on when he lost to Tapales. I was one of the sort of first people that said I don't really feel sorry for him at all because he's had the opportunity to take big fights. It's not like he's taking on these mandatories because no one will fight him. Like you said, he had the opportunity to take him, didn't take him. He got out of shape and then just rolled into the ring and thought I'll beat Tapales, and ultimately it backfired. So I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, you can't waste time in this game. It's
Yeah.
boxing changes every hour. Forget the day, but it changes by the hour. It seems like.
Yeah, facts.
Yeah. Who do you have pound number one? Because there's this argument between Crawford and Inoue, like who's the best fighter in the world? Is it one of those guys, or do you think it's somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think those two are the best two fighters in the world right now. I have it 1A and 1B whenever someone asks me because I've seen, because it's obviously been recently the end of 2023 and the fighter of the year conversation has come up. Like there's been people that are like fighting for Crawford or fighting for Inoue. I'm kind of more just like, they're both great. They've both had fantastic years. They've both gone a little bit differently about how they've gone undisputed this year. Crawford might have the best win of them this year and maybe the best performance of them. But Inoue, what he's done, starting the year with no belts and then moving up and finishing with all the belts, being two unified champions. Right now, I think personally I have Inoue, but I'm someone that rewards activity as well. I'm someone that doesn't like when someone is one of the best in the sport and thinks, okay, that gives me a hall pass to just fight once a year now. I like that Inoue moves up and looks to get his work done, get his stuff done. So I just have him for the inactivity factor. And if anyone's ever seen one of my pound for pound lists, a lot of guys do get punished on my list for not being active. So I would have Inoue just because he's a little bit more regular at the minute.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, he's definitely doing his thing, but one of the things that I think, like you mentioned earlier, makes your channel stand out, and it makes it stand out to me because it's actually one of the reasons I go to your channel is your coverage of the 105-pound division, the minimum weights, which doesn't get any coverage at all. Even me, I just now really started covering the minimum weights, and a lot of that is due in large part to your content. What could you tell people about the minimum weight division? Like, what are they missing out on? Who do you feel are some of the standout fighters? Because I know you got you got Oscar Collazo, the Joker brothers, but just break it down for me.
Yeah, that minimum weight division. I put a tweet out there last week or maybe the week before and just said in kind of the end of year reviews and people do their awards and kind of in all the big publications, no one will really mention the 105-pound division. But for me, that was the division of 2023 because we saw 4 new world champions crowned. And the big issue with minimum weight is I get it that there's not really known stars in the division. Obviously, you always think of Ricardo Lopez, but you don't really think of any other minimum weights throughout history. But the issue with the division has been in recent years is that there's been long reigning champions from particular countries. So Thailand's had a lot of champions
Yeah.
who don't fight outside of Thailand. And then some of the other belts will change hands between Filipinos, and there's just not really any big names that have kind of come to the forefront. And even Japanese fighters that win world titles there, whether it be your likes of Ioka, Aguchi, Tanaka, a lot of these guys win it, but then they're straight up. They're not looking to unify. They want that belt and they're moving on. What was great about last year is that some of those aging champions were being offered good money by Koki Kameda to go and face young lions that Koki Kameda has at his disposal. So the Shigioka brothers, both undefeated from Japan, are very highly rated, and Kameda was pushing those guys. Oscar Collazo, like you said, is promoted by Miguel Cotto Promotions and Eric Gomez at Golden Boy. So they pushed him as well. And last year we saw Jerusalem be the WBO champion. Then we saw Collazo beat him for that belt. Then we saw both the Shigioka brothers going to win world titles. And I think just what's great about that division is in boxing generally, we get very frustrated that we don't always see fights between 2 top 10 guys in the division. Well, last year we saw Shigioka against Valadares. That's 2 top 10 guys in the division. Shigioka against Cueto. That's 2 top 10 guys in the division. Shigioka against Mendez, 2 top 10 guys in the division. Shigioka against Pechmani, CP Freshmart, 2 top 10 guys in the division. Then we got Jerusalem against Taniguchi, 2 top 10 guys. And then Jerusalem against Collazo, 2 top 10 guys. So in all these other divisions where everyone's got their eyes on and are complaining, oh, this guy's not fighting that guy. Last year, we got all of them. And what's great is the 3 new world champions that we see at the end of the year in Collazo and the Shigiokas, they're all really young. So it's not these guys that are over in Thailand and they're in their mid-30s and they're looking to just keep the belt for as long as possible. We've got a young new wave of fighters coming through in that division that are quite small. So they're not looking to move up to 108 or 112 as soon as possible. So I think it's one of the best divisions in boxing right now.
Yeah, and I think the whole storyline of Oscar Collazo versus the Shigiokas is probably the thing that I think could really push the minimum weight division to the forefront, because Oscar Collazo has the big promoter with Golden Boy Promotions, and I don't know about you, but for me, when I look at the skills, I think Oscar Collazo might be the most skilled Puerto Rican fighter in the sport right now. So I think there's a lot of potential with the 105-pound division right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Oscar Collazo is someone that I've sort of grown close with over recent years because I saw him in the amateurs, and when he turned pro, I felt like he just needed a push. But you're absolutely right. And what's great is when Melvin Jerusalem fought Oscar Collazo was his mandatory challenger. And the Kamedas, who look after both the Shigiokas, they were also looking after Melvin Jerusalem at the time. So when that purse bid came up, the Kamedas bid heavily for the fight, and Eric Gomez on Oscar Collazo's half had to bid even heavier for the fight. And the both of them ended up making a lot of money. But we saw the relationship starting to build there between Golden Boy and Koki Kameda. So, like you say, there's opportunities now for Collazo to fight the Shigiokas. So it's a really exciting time for that division, for sure.
For people that don't know the Shigiokas, right? Because I've watched a couple fights, but you got Jinjiro and you got Udai. How would you describe both their styles, and who do you think has the higher ceiling as a professional?
So when they initially first started their careers, Jinjiro was the one that he just looks a little bit more like a superstar. There's a certain thing with Japanese fighters that do turn into superstars, whether it's Inoue as a boxer or whether it was Tenshin as a kickboxer. Just the way that they throw punches, the way that the hand speed, the movements, the twitchiness, the way they knock people out. There's just a superstar feel about it. And Jinjiro definitely had that feel more so than Udai. In the amateurs, Jinjiro was a bit of a better amateur as well. They actually faced each other in an amateur tournament in the final. And because Jinjiro had already won that medal before, he decided that he just was going to throw the towel in at the start of the first round. So he let Udai win. So Udai's always, despite being the bigger brother, has been the less talented. But since we've seen them step up to world level, Udai's actually been the one with the slightly more impressive performances. They're both southpaw. Jinjaro's a little bit more flashy and twitchy, and is probably a little bit more like your Kenshiros and your Inoues. But Yudai's got a little bit more substance, and perhaps is more like your Junto
Slick.
Nakatani.
He's
Yeah,
slick.
he's a bit more like your Junto Nakatani or someone like that, or your Aguchi. So I think both of them are supremely talented. Jinjaro's the one with bigger backing, but Yudai's the one that's been delivering more so of late.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when I really first started watching their fights, I'd seen some highlights of Jinjiro knocking Cuerto out.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked him off of first glance, but then when I actually sat down and watched the entire fight for both, Udai was the one that really caught my eye.
Yeah, I sort of say, like, with Jinjiro, it's more style, but with Udai, it's more substance. There's a little bit more there that makes you believe that he can go in against anyone. So they're both supremely talented, though.
Okay. You mentioned going close to Oscar Collazo. What's he like as a person, and then just your relationship with him, Oscar Collazo?
Yeah, he's just really ambitious. Like ever since I first kind of spoke to him, he was just always confident that he'd win a world title. And for a little bit of a backstory on him, I saw him win a gold medal at the Pan American Games. But at the Pan American Games, there's more weight divisions than there actually was at the Olympics. So when it came around to the Olympics, Oscar was actually too small for the smallest weight class, which is flyweight at the Olympics.
That's insane.
So it's insane. So he couldn't go to the Olympics for that reason. And if he would have gone, he would have been, one of the best amateur boxers at that tournament. So he didn't go. He turned pro. Miguel Cotto kind of picked him up because he was a talented Puerto Rican amateur, but there wasn't really much more to it. But as he went on, the performances spoke for themselves. And then Golden Boy, Eric Gomez, and Oscar De La Hoya have worked with him. And what was great last year is any opportunity they could get with Oscar, they really tried to put him on the big cards. When Ortiz was supposed to fight Stanionis back in April of last year, he was supposed to be the sort of co-feature for that card. Then there was talks of Terence Crawford potentially fighting Alexis Rocha on a Golden Boy show before the Spence fight. Yeah, and there was talk of Collazo being the co-main event for that one as well. So he's getting the push now. Really ambitious guy, good family who now all support my channel just because I support Oscar. So yeah, his brother Felix is a great guy as well. So yeah, they're a top bunch.
Okay. Well, thank you for the rundown of the 105 division. Hopefully people start to follow a bit more this year because there's a lot of value there.
100%.
But on that Inoue card as well, because I know you did watch fight. I saw a tweet about it. On the co-main event for the Inoue to Paulus card, you had like one of the best fights I ever seen with Kazuki Anaguchi and Seisusumi.
Yeah.
What did you make of all that whole fight?
Yeah, it was an interesting fight. Obviously, Anaguchi coming into it undefeated, and Satsumi has a bit of a weird record where he's had some fights that could have gone against him, fights that he perhaps could have won as well. And it's just kind of a sign of the Japanese boxing title, which is just such a competitive level. It really does propel you to move on to the next stage. Much like over here in the UK, we have the British title, and British title fights are always amazing. It's kind of the same over in Japan. You get guys that are really well matched, not necessarily world level fighters, but really good competitive fights. And Anaguchi, because he was unbeaten, you didn't quite know whether he was going to put it all together. Satsumi has a bit of a weird record, although he was the power puncher in the fight. But really, that was the difference between them, was the power punching. Early on, Anaguchi was getting the better of him. He was picking him apart. But then once he got put down once, he proved that his chin could be cracked. And you could see throughout the fight, I know he was in a bit of a bad way after the fight where he collapsed and stuff. A lot of that was just fatigue. Like, he'd never fought at that pace before. It was a brutal fight. And Satsumi's power ultimately told the tale. But it's one of those fights where you don't really want one of them to go on to bigger and better things. You want to see him rematch. You want to see him stay in and around that level for more great fights. So it was a wonderful fight.
Yeah. Anaguchi has he's fighting for his life right now. So who knows if ever box again? But I was kind of hoping that he would get active again, and Seiya would go on to win the world title, and then they could do a big rematch for the world title. That would have been ideal.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully Anaguchi's doing okay. Speaking to someone after the fight, they were saying a lot of it was the fatigue and the tiredness, more so than kind of the injury itself. So hopefully that with a good bit of rest and stuff, we find out some more positive news soon.
No, 100%. I know also in Japan, I'm going to run through all the Japanese stuff first. I know also in Japan, recently we had Kazuro Ioka. He got another knockout victory against Jasper Perez, who we didn't know much about, and he wasn't the highest ranked contender. But what's your take on Ioka in 2024? Like, because he's at the latter stage of his career. There's still some massive fights from the division. How are you seeing 2024 for Ioka?
Yeah, he's an odd one, Kazuki Ioka. I mean, he's always gone against the grain over in Japan. You know, he's always kind of gone against Tekken, who are the main promotional people before Hashi and Inoue kind of stepped into the market. But, you know, he's never really worked with Tekken fighters. He's built a bit of a rivalry there. He's, you know, been hated by the Japanese Boxing Commission as well. So Ioka's always been a bit of a strange one. But every time you get frustrated with him, you just watch him and think, my God, he's good. You know, his left hand, the jab, it's so cultured, and he boxes brilliantly. But 2023 was slightly frustrating. I thought he got things right in the rematch against Franco. He was brilliant in the rematch. But then he spent the rest of the year trying to negotiate for a big fight in Japan and really didn't plan for anything else to happen. He always fights on New Year's Eve, and he knew that was going to happen. But when he couldn't deliver Estrada, Chocolatito, any of these big names, he just decided that, okay, well, I'll still fight on that day, but I'll just fight someone in the rankings. And I think for Ioka now, no one wants to see those type of fights anymore. You need to see Ioka in the legacy definers at the back end of his career. I can't necessarily see where a lot of them come from, to be honest with you, because of his issues with other promoters. Obviously, he had the mandatory with Junto Nakatani last year, and he swerved that. He decided to vacate the belt. Junto's now moved up, so the Kosi Tanaka is going to be challenging for that vacant belt, who he's already beat. But now Tanaka's going to be with Tekken for this upcoming fight. Can Ioka work with Tekken? Chocolatito obviously works with Tekken. That fight's never been delivered because of the promoter.
Jamie, you're cutting in and out. I don't know if you could. Hello? You cut out for a second.
Hello.
You're good. You're good now.
Oh, yeah, it cut for me. Yeah, I was going to say, Ioka can't necessarily get those fights against the likes of Chocolatito and Tanaka because they now work with Tekken. And then Estrada is going to be fighting Bam. And the problem is with the likes of Estrada and Bam is they earn so much goddamn money on DAZN now that they're not going to go to Japan to fight Ioka for a fifth of the money. So Ioka's got a little bit of a turbulent year coming up, I think, if he really wants those big fights to happen.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say like the only options for him were like either gonna be Guile or Estrada, the Tanaka rematch. But now that you spoke about it, I mean, the only option I can think of is the most attractive, which maybe him versus like a scrappy Ramirez, because I know that he's the #1 contender. I just talked about it at the convention, and they want to make that fight happen. So it's tumultuous times for Ioka.
Yeah, I mean, Scrappy's one of the guys that from America that he could probably provide enough money to face. The problem is with the likes of Chocolatito, Estrada, etc. They've earned so much money on DAZN over the last couple of fights that they're not going to want to go over to Japan. But for Scrappy, it would be a career high payday. So I think that's a good option for him.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes, man. Junto Nakatani is fighting Alexandro Santiago. It's his first fight at bantamweight. I know Guile Estrada expressed that he might be going up to bantamweight, so maybe that winds up being a fight between Nakatani and Guile. But how do you feel about the prospects of Junto at 118? Because a lot of people think that he might just be the best fighter in Japan, not named Inoue.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very high on Junto for a very long time. It's quite cool on my channel because a lot of subscribers and stuff found out about Junto through watching my videos and stuff, which was kind of cool to see his transition since. And what I love about the Santiago fight is it would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to go and fight Jason Maloney. He's knocked out his brother. They both work with Top Rank. It would have been an easy fight to make. But instead, he went out there and he pursued another belt. You know, he's won WBO titles before. He wants to go win that green and gold belt. He wants to win a WBC title. Santiago's coming off the biggest win of his career over Donaire. I love that Junto's kind of gone outside the box a little bit for this one. He will eventually unify against Jason Maloney, providing he gets through Santiago. But Junto is so talented and there's just no ceiling because he's so big and he's so tall. The guy looks like he could box at lightweight if he wanted to. So he's that sort of fighter that you really don't know just how far he can get. Sometimes you watch him and you're blown away. There's other times where you think, okay, maybe just put the brakes on a little bit. Like,
that's how I feel.
The RG Cortez fight last time out, he didn't look his best, and that was another one where you're facing, a different style to what you're accustomed to facing over in Japan. So just sort of tone it down a little bit. But Junto's got so much talent that I think once Inoue gets to the back end of his career, it'll be Junto that takes over from him.
You ever think those two could fight each other? Because like they're not too far away from each other in weight, and Junto is definitely big enough to move up to wherever Inoue is at. You think that winds up being a big Japanese fight one day?
Maybe It literally just depends on the weight, I think. It just depends if like Inoue and Junto kind of move at the same pace. It's like, Junto finally gets to super bantam and Inoue goes up to featherweight, and then it happens again. And maybe Inoue's too long in the tooth by the time that Junto gets to a featherweight. So I think the timings are a little bit off right now, but if it could ever happen one day, it maybe could end up being the perfect fight for Junto to take over from Inoue.
It might be. It might be the classic passing of the torch fight, kind of like a De La
Absolutely.
Hoya Chavez was back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then just the last thing about the Japanese, right? I know you got a guy I'm a big fan of that I had a chance to actually meet when I was in Japan. Kenshiro Taraji. He's taking on Carlos Canizales, mandatory. I know you got Jonathan Gonzalez, who he was supposed to fight, but then injuries and whatnot. And then you also got the Adrian Carrillo Chinga rematch. So light flyweight looks like it's gonna be pretty interesting this year. How do you feel about Kenshiro's next fight and just the whole light flyweight picture right now?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is this fight against Canizales could be his last at light flyweight. For a long time, Ken Shiro's wanted to go undisputed at this weight class and unify, but the fight with Aguchi was a big moment for him, the biggest win of his career, and he unified in that fight. He was supposed to then go straight into the unification against Jonathan Gonzalez, and when that fell through, he then had the fight already agreed with Heki Butler, so it got a little bit messy for Ken Shiro, and I think he's got to the stage now where he just wants to move on. So if he beats Canizales, who's a damn good fighter, I think he's looking to move up, because also on the card you have Artem Dalakayan, who's the WBA champion at flyweight. If Dalakayan wins, I think there's already talks with Tekken and Mr. Honda to make the Ken Shiro versus Dalakayan fight at flyweight later in the year. So there is talks for that to happen. And I think that could be the route that Ken Shiro goes down. But as much as I rate Junto Nakatani, Ken Shiro's longer in the tooth. And right now I have Ken Shiro as the second best Japanese fighter. I think he's sensational.
Oh, he's absolutely sensational. He kind of boxes like a baby Dimitri Bivol with that long right hand. The way he cocks that long right hand down the middle, So yeah, I'm looking forward to see what he does. I know one fight that I heard in an interview, this fighter actually expressed interest if I Ken Shiro. If he moves up, this could be an option. Maybe Ken Shiro versus your countryman Sonny Edwards at 112.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. Sonny's also spoke about potentially moving down to fight the Curiel Nonshinga rematch winner, because they're obviously working with Matchroom. So that could be a possibility. Maybe just as Ken Shiro comes up, Sonny goes down. But nonetheless, I want to see Ken Shiro kind of move up, because the bigger names are at flyweight now. And I just feel like there's quite a golfing class between Ken Shiro and the rest at light flyweight. I don't feel that golf is quite there at flyweight. He'd need to prove himself. So that's what I want to see him do now.
Yeah, a new challenge. So something that, get him up for bigger fights.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree.
Okay. I know you mentioned too. I know one guy you were high on, even though he wound up losing in what I think was the upset of the year. Nochinga, 7-0 Nochinga from South Africa. He has the rematch with Adrian Carrillo. Do you think that was like a case of maybe him not making weight? Is it a weight thing, or was it just, hey, the guy caught me with a good shot?
I think there were a couple of things. I think the weight's difficult for Sivanati. I'm actually like really close. Friends with his manager, so I know like the camp quite well. When I spoke to him ahead of the rematch, and his trainer asked me kind of what I think of it. I do think that watching it, that Sivanati was kind of making some mistakes that you simply can't make against a Mexican fighter like that. Constantly moving to his left. He didn't move to his right at all. And he was just constantly in range of that right hand from Curiel. I said to Colin, his trainer, that going into that rematch, that's a lot to fix. Your tendency to move to your left isn't something you kind of correct with one performance or one training camp. It's something that you've sort of drilled into yourself over the years and the way that you've learned to fight. So I think Sivanati's in for the toughest training camp of his career, where he learns that he needs to do something very different, because he's got away with perhaps getting a little bit too involved at times in some of his fights. Against Hector Flores, he came through that narrowly. Against Reggie Sugarnob, there were times in that fight where he did get clipped but managed to come through it. I do think that the Curiel rematch is going to be the biggest test of his career for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how he comes through it, man, because I'm a little, I was sad when he lost, because to me the fight to make was going to be eventually him versus Ken Shiro. That was that was like the Champions League final, the Super Bowl, the World Series of like the light flyweight division.
Yeah, for sure. And his trainer and manager Colin has worked with Tekken an awful lot, so they were willing to work with Colin and work with Matchroom through him. So it's just a bit gutting that fight fell through.
Yeah, such as boxing, such as life. But I saw your tweet. You were talking about the prospect of the year, you mentioned some interesting prospects, guys that I've covered, some guys that I actually know personally. But you mentioned Mozi Talma, you mentioned Hayato Sutsumi and Abdullah Mason in your prospect of the year tweet on Twitter. Who do you like the most out of those guys? Like Sutsumi, I know different weight classes, but you put them all in the same tweet. So just what's your take on those guys?
Yeah, it kind of feels like they reach a sort of different stage. For Satsumi, I said this in my on my Patreon where I discussed the award. I ended up giving it to Abdullah Mason because he impressed me the most last year. But the thing is with Satsumi, he's gone in at kind of a championship level straight away. He's fighting 10 rounders. He's fought a 12 round already, and he's just a couple of fights in. So he's kind of gone in a little bit deeper than those guys. So I think
already ranked.
Yeah, exactly. I think for that reason, you kind of rate him a little bit higher. Moses Otoma is more just the hype coming out of the amateurs. I mean, he was a tremendous amateur. He's decided to turn pro so early that he could theoretically break Mike Tyson's record. So there's kind of that hype around him. And he just looks convincing. He's a fully grown man. There's stories of him beating up, British heavyweights in sparring. We hear that he's got the better of Lawrence Okoli and Daniel Dubois and all these things. So there's a reason to rate him there. But Abdullah Mason, sometimes when I watch top rank shows over the years, there's just always a prospect that whether I've seen them in the amateurs before or not, but seeing Bam Rodriguez on some of those early top rank shows, seeing Shakur Stevenson on some of them, seeing some of these fighters where you just watch him and go, yeah, that guy's going to win a world title. And I just get that feeling with Abdullah Mason. I wouldn't say yet I have that with Hayato or with Moses just yet. I do think both of them will go on to compete for world titles. But with Abdullah Mason, you just can't help but watch him and just be impressed.
Yeah, I'm definitely very impressed with Abdullah. I know his family quite well, and his dad and all his brothers I know pretty well. I actually wound up setting up some sparring for Abdullah when he came here to Florida back last year. Yeah, last year he sparred down here against a 154 pounder who I won't name, but he looked. I mean, I saw him spar this dude and looked sensational. I mean, I was blown away. I was blown away. He's one of the two top ranked prospects. Him and Shushu Carrington are the two guys. I can say I'm like 100% like I'm sold on them. I believe they're gonna go on to be champions.
Yeah, I mean, I gave Shushu Carrington my 2022 prospect of the year. I gave Abdullah Mason 2023. But I would actually say that, kind of comparing those awards that I gave out, Abdullah Mason does just kind of get the juices flowing a little bit more. There's something about him in the way he delivers his punches that just looks a little bit different.
There's a certain meanness to him. He's a mean guy. He's got that mean streak to him. Sometimes you watch, like, not to disrespect them, but like guys like Devin Haney and Shakur who are more technical boxers, and they sometimes lack that mean streak you want in them. But Abdullah seems to have some of that, some of those skills, but he actually has more of that mean streak to him.
Yeah, for sure. Like Shakur and Devin can go through the motions a little bit at times when their power's not there, but Abdullah he forces things, he makes it happen. So yeah, got a lot of appreciation for Abdullah Mason. I think he's a beast.
Okay. Are there any American prospects you like besides Abdullah Mason? Any other American prospects that you watch and you say, what, I like watching that guy fight?
There's been quite a few over sort of recent times. Abdullah Mason is someone that does just stand out to me an awful lot. Diego Pacheco is someone that I've been very high on recently. I feel like he's finally taken that step. There was a time on Matchroom where he was with Matchroom pretty much since they launched the USA venture. But there was a time where it felt like they kept almost putting him in with like very similar opponents that he was dealing with in very similar fashion. And then he almost looked a bit disinterested. But then they started to slowly step it up. And his last performance against Caceres, and even coming over to the UK early last year and just getting rid of Jack Cullen like it was nothing. Jack Cullen's no world beater, but here in the UK, he's known for causing upsets on the domestic scene. And the way
he's experienced.
Exactly. And the way Pacheco just came over and just like cleaned him out, wiped the floor with him. That's what we want to see. And Pacheco is someone as well that I think is kind of moving on from just being a prospect now, but he's another guy that's really impressed me whenever I've watched him.
Yeah, I've been big on Diego since they first signed him. That to me is like, Eddie Hearn's best American talent. I've been saying that for a number of years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'll also been you got guys like have you watched like Ernesto Mercado by any chance? Tito Mercado, the 40 pounder.
Yeah. I mean, 140 is one of those divisions in America that just like you just seem to churn them out. At 135 and 140 in America right now is just like crazy amounts of talent coming.
That's the only weight class where we seem to be getting it right. Everywhere else, we're not really doing too great. But 135, 140, 47, 54, we got guys there.
Yeah, I mean at 135 as well, you got Floyd Schofield, Kid Austin, that I really like the look of as well. I think he's been impressive and in the conversation for one of those sort of prospects of the year awards as well. He's been great. So a lot of impressive guys over in America.
Nah, for sure, for sure. We got a super chat. Shout out to my main man Hyro. He wants to know from you, Jamie, what do you think about Albert Bell versus Vaquero Navarrete?
It's an interesting fight. The thing is with Navarrete is you don't know what you're going to get. I said in the kind of short time that he's been at 130 pounds, the range of performances that we've had has been like Liam Wilson, where he arguably should have lost. I mean, he looked awful in that fight. Then maybe a career best performance against Oscar Valdez, where he looked sensational. And then Robson Conceição, where he's kind of in the middle of those two performances. And some moments are great.
I thought he lost that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of no gauge with Navarrete, but I do think when you get in there with him as a conventional boxer, a bit like Albert Bell is, sometimes Navarrete can be really hard to just figure things out at times because he is so awkward. So a lot of the fight depends on what Navarrete you get, but Albert Bell, I've been impressed with him, and I remember George Cambosa's got him in for sparring ahead of Devin Haney, and he said at the time like he was really impressed with Albert Bell. So I've been impressed with him too of late.
Yeah, our Bell's been one of those guys. He's always been towards the top of those WBO rankings, but nobody seems to want to fight him. I know there's been a lot of guys that have avoided that challenge. So I hope he gets a shot against Vaquero. That'd be a good fight for 2024 at 30.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me at 130, you know, guys that we've seen sort of break through in the last sort of year, 18 months, in the likes of Oshaki Foster and Lamar Roach that have been at 130 pounds, been kind of knocking on the door, maybe have fallen short here or there, but are kind of just there and we're waiting for that fight. And I think Albert Bell's on the cusp of having one of those moments as well.
Yeah, so we'll definitely see how it goes. 130 is going to be an interesting division. I know Lamar Roach, man, he had a great performance against Hector Garcia. He's in an interesting position because I know like he's a promotional free agent. He's not tied down to a network. What do you see him in the 130 division, Lamar Roach?
Yeah, I mean, I think Top Rank are probably going to be making some phone calls, but obviously because they signed Oshaki Foster, they've got Navarrete, so they've kind of got the share of the champions in that division. And Joe Cordina isn't interested in world champions, so I don't see Matchroom necessarily giving Lamont Roach a call and trying to get him in on their books, because Joe Cordina's made it quite clear that he just wants the biggest payday possible, and Lamont Roach wouldn't provide that. So I think that, you know, Top Rank will be the ones that look at Lamont Roach and see, you know, how they can get him in the mix. But we'll wait and see what happens, because a win like that does just put you on the right path. It happened for Oshaki Foster, who just was never quite on the right path, finally gets the win, and now we're seeing he's getting all these opportunities.
Yeah, I like Joe Cordina, man, but I don't like how he became an accountant once Oshaki Foster became, you know, a thing for him to find a possible opponent. He started becoming an accountant.
Yeah, I mean, you could kind of see it even from his amateur days. Like, he was always kind of, you know, walking around in Gucci and things like that before he'd even really made any proper money. So you knew once he gets that paycheck, it's going to become more and more about the money and the lifestyle. So I'm not surprised, but Cordina's, to be fair to him, the one thing I will say is he's not one of these fighters that is all about the money, but pretends he's about the belts and the legacy, and then doesn't take these fights and is trying to sell you some rubbish. Joe Cordina's just straight up telling us, the fans, that, hey, I just want the payday, so give me whoever's going to make me the money. So at least he's been transparent with us.
Yeah, you could always respect that.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
But also in your country, right? Because this guy's getting a lot of hype over there, and I saw him calling out some of the guys over here. Adam Azim. What's your take on Adam Azim? Because I've heard mixed things. I've heard everything from he's the next big thing to he's Amir Khan. If Amir Khan was actually a great fighter, what's your take on Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's kind of in the middle of how people rank him. Some people think he's the next superstar. Some people think he's worthless. He's not talented. I think he kind of sits in the middle, where his last few performances where he's had to step up, we have seen gradual improvement. And that's all you want to see from a young fighter in the UK, especially if Sky Sports, who are the kind of biggest sports channel over here in the UK, when they promote a fighter, they tend to really over promote them and put too much against their name. And I think that's kind of happened with Adam Azim. He's a supreme athlete. If you just watch the speed, the reason a lot of people compare him to Amir Khan is because of the speed. You know, when he throws a shot, you almost sort of blink and it's over. He's got great hand speed. He's got a great trainer in Shane McGuigan. He just needs to add a little bit more substance. You know, going back to a few fighters that we've spoke about where the style's there, but perhaps the substance not. In the UK, we've had a lot of those fighters, the likes of Josh Kelly, that have the style and the flashiness, but when they kind of step up to your David Avanesians and your world levels, the substance
Ray Robinsons and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like Adam Azim, especially, and it's not just because of who he is as a fighter, especially at 140 pounds. Like, you could fight someone in the top 30 and they'd be incredibly dangerous. Like, that division is so loaded. If he was, perhaps in a week, if he was at middleweight, for example, which there's a bit of a talent shortage at the minute, maybe it's easier for you to break into the top 10. But Adam Azim, you'd have to play the cards right, because that's a tough old division to try and crack.
No, it definitely is. You know what, Jamie? One thing I like to ask you about, I guess, British boxing, right? What's like from your perspective, what's like the British boxing scene like over there? Because in America, sometimes British fighters have a reputation for being a bit, like pillow fisted and too technical. But what's your overall take on just British boxing right now?
Yeah, I mean, British boxing's kind of in an interesting place where when Eddie Hearn came into the game pretty much a decade ago, he kind of brought back big British boxing Saturday nights. It felt like we'd have big events every so often. Kind of what's happened more recently with everyone kind of splitting off, and we have Boxer with Sky Sports over here, we have Frank Roran with TNT, we have Eddie Hearn with DAZN, and we have so many broadcasters now. It did used to really be Frank against Eddie on each platform, and it was kind of, they could kind of work.
Didn't they have like Mick Hennessy as well? Mick Hennessy, and there was like somebody else too. I can't remember who it was right now. But
yeah, there's Mick Hennessy. There's been a few, but it's always felt like those two were the main two. But with Sky taking on Boxer and stuff, it's become a bit fractured. I think the biggest concern here in the UK is that over the last couple of years, Anthony Joshua's had some huge nights. Tyson Fury's had some big nights. We've had some big events. We've been able to fill out, our national stadium at Wembley and have some great events like that. But I think the scary thing for British boxing right now is we're still going to get your likes of Lee Wood versus Mauricio. Those type of Saturday night fight nights are still going to be there. But those stadium fillers are all going to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have come to British boxing, and one day we may get Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury, which is arguably the biggest British fight of all time, and it's going to be in Saudi in front of a couple of hundred people. So Saudi Arabia, although it's great for making fights happen because money isn't an issue to them, they will just pay. It is a bit of an issue for us in the UK because those Anthony Joshua fight nights at Wembley or at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, they are what brings casual fans. Casual fans go to those fights, they watch it, they enjoy it and go, I want to go to another boxing event, or I'm going to watch it next Saturday or whatever. We don't have as many of those now, which I think is a big concern moving forwards.
Yeah, I think we have that same. We're having that same problem in the USA now because Las Vegas isn't getting the amount of fights it used to get. And in like professional American sports, a lot of like Las Vegas has like they have hockey now. They're about to get a baseball team. They had the NFL. Now they're talking about having the NBA. So I think boxing in Vegas is going to have a big problem in the next 5 to 10 years. And now, just like you, all the big fights is going to Saudi. So I'm really intrigued to see what happens with big time boxing the next decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think British boxing could be the one that's kind of because we have quite a big say on the heavyweight division at the minute. I feel like that's why the Saudis are running with it. But it is a little bit concerning as a British fight fan because I do think we're losing some of those sort of big events here in this country.
Okay. I know you've been to the States before. I know you went to like DLX gym, and I know you've seen some sparring here in America. What would you say is the difference between American boxing gyms and I guess British boxing gyms as far as their training and whatnot?
I mean, the UK ones, and the thing is, I went to the DLX gym in the US, which is quite a nice facility. It's not I'm sure if you went to a gym in Detroit or somewhere in Philadelphia, like, Bosie Ennis' gym or something like that, where it's a lot kind of gritty and grimy. So like my initial reaction would be, well, the UK gyms seem a little bit grittier and grimier, but I went to one of the nicest gyms in Vegas, so I can't really say that. So I feel like it's quite a different vibe though. I feel like maybe the DLX gym was a part of that, but it kind of felt like there was a lot more of a relaxed vibe. I do think that, being the Daenerys was probably a factor in that because there's a lot of family around. They're very chilled out. Angelo Leo was there, who I know you're a big fan of. They're very chilled and kind of relaxed as well. So here in the UK, I think the gyms that I've kind of spent time in, there's a bit more. I find that here in the UK, you see a lot more sort of classes going on while something's happening. There could be two fighters sparring in the ring, but then there's also a class being run over there with a bunch of kids or whatever, and then there's someone working away on the bag. I found that UK gyms are a little bit busier, but like I say, I haven't been to those sort of grimy gyms in Detroit or in New York or in these places, so I can't comment on it too tough.
Okay, yeah, it's a big country. I haven't even gone to Detroit yet, and I live in America, so there's still so much I gotta go see in the States. So I definitely get it. You gonna come to America anytime soon? Come back to the USA anytime soon?
Definitely, one of my sort of big reasons for going to Vegas was to get to a fight night. Got to see Canelo versus Bivol, which is great. But kind of on the bucket list, I've been to Madison Square Garden, which was actually for the New York Knicks game. But I'd love to get there for a big fight. And there's so many great places now. You see Arizona has kind of become a bit of a hotbed rather than Texas for fight nights. I'd love to get to an Arizona show where, you see the likes of Sonny against Bam and those sorts of fight nights as well. So, yeah, I mean, getting back to America is definitely on the bucket list to see more big fights.
Yeah, hopefully you do, man, because there's no shortage of places to go here in the States. But kind of want to talk about the heavyweight division because I know your countryman we mentioned earlier, Anthony Joshua. He had a great performance against Otto Wallin. He looked like the 2018 AJ, and a lot of people are now looking at him as being a champion again. And I know you've said this before, and I've said this before. It's expected that he's going to fight Filip Hrgović for the IBF title once that belt inevitably goes vacant. What do you think about that overall matchup, Joshua versus Hrgović for the IBF?
Yeah, I'm surprised that I don't know whether it's Eddie Hearn maybe not wanting to jinx anything. I'm surprised there's not kind of more talk about it because, like you said, for us two, it's kind of seems so obvious for quite a while that if Wilder was to fall through for any reason or if something was to go awry in the heavyweight division, it was always going to be Hrgović Joshua. So I'm kind of surprised there's not more talk about it, even since the Saudi card happened on the December 23rd. I think what's interesting is I think AJ, that performance against Otto Wallin has answered a lot of questions for people. There were far too many performances in a row that just led you to believe he's not that guy anymore. Against Otto Wallin, he just looked every bit that guy. I mean, it's the best version of AJ we've seen in a long time. And what was great about it was that kind of the early AJ, whilst he was great, whilst he was confident, he was dynamic, he was explosive, he was quite big, he was quite rigid. And then he went through this phase where he slimmed down, became a little bit mobile, a little bit more dynamic, but was not quite as talented and wasn't quite as confident in his punching power. What we saw against Otto Wallin seemed to be a bit of a mix of both, where he's a little bit leaner, a little bit lighter, a bit more mobile, but had that spite and that precision and that self-belief and that confidence. So now that that's back, I don't think there's many heavyweights out there that can talk to that version of AJ. I think the Filip Hrgović fight is a great fight. Hrgović is a big heavyweight, and I always like to see AJ in against big heavyweights. He's had a lot of trouble with smaller guys, but I think seeing him in against a colossal heavyweight like we saw against Klitschko is where you get to see AJ in his best fights, where you get to see him in with someone that can really match him. I think Hrgović, his stock has dropped kind of more recently just because
it really has.
He hasn't quite, capitalized on the early part of his career when he was kind of this Croatian sort of robot machine that was just going through everyone. The Zhang fight exposed some holes, and then since then just hasn't been entirely convincing. I know he's gone through some hardships in his personal life that's kind of led to that as well, and some, change in trainers and things like that. But I think Hrgović, off his last few performances and AJ getting back to his best in his last one, I think most people are probably riding with AJ right now.
Now they are. I'm out on Hrgović. I think Hrgović will beat him. I think he'll beat him if they fight. But I'm just hoping it happens because I know AJ has options. Like he can fight Wilder, or they could always pull the Francis Ngannou out of nowhere.
Yeah, and like you say, like the money's there now with Saudi. That like the money between fighting Hrgović and fighting someone else is always gonna be something for AJ. I mean, they're even talking about Wilder losing. They're still saying, well, that contract's still there for AJ and Wilder to fight for a load of money, so why not just do it? So it'll be interesting to see if he does fight Hrgović.
That's kind of like when who was it? I can't remember if it was Barrera or Morales, but one of them lost to was it Zaire Rahim, and then they still wound up doing the rematch anyway. Even when they lost to Zaire Rahim.
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, stars make fights. Wilder could lose to Parker, but get in and just land one shot against AJ. There's just no telling. So I think that there's still the interest there from people.
No, 100%. My man Kaze says the two kings of Japanese boxing coverage for English speakers. How did this not happen sooner? It happened in 2022. I wanted his channel, but it didn't happen on this channel because of me, not because of Jamie. It was because of me. but he's here now. That's all I know. We delivered. He also says that he has a theory that low sunlight levels lead to deficiencies in Brit's bone structure growing up, leading to orbital breaks. Does Jamie have any theories on that?
No sort of no long-winded theories that are quite
That's
as extravagant as that one.
that's pretty scientific. That's a scientific conclusion he came to there.
I mean, he's right though. Like we do. I mean, in recent years, Kell Brook, Billy Joe Saunders, Daniel Dubois, Sonny Edwards, Josh Warren's broke his jaw, Ricky Burns a while. Like it does happen to British fighters, but I'm not sure whether it's the lack of sun that's leading to
Yeah,
that.
who knows? I know. Yeah, I know it's very cloudy there because when I went, I was there for like a month back in 2019, and I'll never forget how cloudy it was. I was depressed.
Yeah, to put it into perspective, it hasn't stopped raining for 4 days now, so that gives
Yeah,
you an idea.
yeah, well, yeah. So, Hiram wants to know from you, Jamie. He says, "What are your thoughts on PBC on the Amazon Prime deal, and as far as them getting, I guess, a second network?"
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I know Showtime, like, it's one of those sort of nostalgic things like HBO was, where, like, you don't want to see it go. It's you kind of associate a certain part of boxing with Showtime. But for us here in the UK, we don't get Showtime. So, like, it's always a nightmare for us to watch it. We get lucky when there's, I don't know, whether there's a Tank Davis fight or whether there's, Crawford against Spence, for example, where maybe DAZN have paid the rights for it or whether it ends up on a pay-per-view over here. That's great. But for the most part, we can't watch Showtime cards. We can watch Amazon Prime. So that's great for us fight fans over here in the UK. We're probably more happier with being on Amazon. So I can understand the sort of nostalgic feel around losing Showtime. But for us here in the UK, it may be different in the States, but over here in the UK, it's so much easier for us to be able to watch those shows now.
And it's already hard because you guys got to stay up to like 3 or 4 in the morning to watch these fights. I did it once. I'll never forget. I stayed up to like 3 or 4 in the morning to watch Jamal Charlo versus I think it was Dennis Hogan in 2019. That was brutal.
Yeah, it's not easy, especially like you say, especially when there's not just you can't just turn your telly on and watch it either. You've got to find a way to watch it. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it is what it is. I know you mentioned earlier that you went to Vegas for the Bivol fight. And Bivol had his fight against Lyndon Arthur recently, which was what it was. It was a textbook Bivol performance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about Bivol potentially going into the better BF fight if it winds up happening next?
Yeah, Bivol is the biggest knock on him as a pound for pound fighter is there's no pound for pound fighter that carries average opposition quite like he does.
Oh, God.
He's exceptional against good fighters. Against Canelo's brilliant. Against Gilberto Ramirez, he was brilliant. But when he's forced to just take either a tune-up fight or a keep busy fight, he's just had so many of them. And it feels like I've watched that performance 15 times. The Craig Richards fight, Umar Salamov, yeah, Lyndon Arthur. It feels like it's the exact same performance, just against a different opponent. And that's my biggest knock on him as a pound for pound fighter. I don't think anyone else in the pound for pound rankings necessarily plays with their food as much as he does against average oppositions. But the thing is with Bivol is if he goes into a Beterbiev fight or manages to get another elite name on his resume, I'm not going to judge him on those performances. I will judge him on what he did against Canelo and what he did against Zurdo Ramirez, because that's where we see the best of him. So there's ways that he causes Beterbiev a lot of problems. I mean, Beterbiev has a tough fight against Callum Smith. He's getting injured a lot. He fights once a year. He's getting towards 40. Beterbiev is getting to the stage now where at some point he's just going to get beat by someone that's not better than him, but he's just too old. So I think Beterbiev, his time's running out.
A lot of people are think that Callum Smith's going to be that guy. I mean, I don't quite see it, but how do you feel about Callum Smith?
I've always been, I've caught a lot of heat for this, mate. Like so many people have got onto me for this over the years, but I've always said that Callum Smith is just a little bit overrated. I felt that John Ryder beat him. I felt that I felt against Canelo Alvarez, he didn't win a round, and a lot of people go, no, he won 1 or 2. It's like, no, if you actually watch the fight, he didn't win a round against Canelo. He was thoroughly outboxed and beaten. And at light heavyweight, I get, with Buddy McGirt now, he does look a little bit more confident. But my biggest issue with Callum Smith is the 2 times an opponent has pressured him and stuck it on him, which was Ryder and Canelo Alvarez, he just froze. He froze up. All the things he does well, that sort of catch left hook that he throws, the jab, the right, all of the brilliant stuff he doesn't do when someone sticks it on him. And when you feel Beterbiev's power, that's the type of power that just makes you go, oh, I don't want much more of that. And I can just see Callum Smith for a round or 2 being dangerous. And then the second he feels one of those body shots or feels something on the bicep or the shoulders again, he just tucks up on the ropes and takes a beating. That's
pretty much how I'm seeing it, to be honest with you. Because Callum, like, I've never been the highest on Callum. I thought he was a good. He's a good fighter. I mean, he's been championship fighter, but I thought he lost to John Ryder, and then when he fought Canelo, I feel like in that fight he showed his true colors, and then in the run so far at light heavyweight with Bader Leak and Lennon Castillo, like to me he hasn't even really felt light heavyweight power yet. I'm still waiting for him to get hit by a proper light heavyweight.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's my thing with Callum Smith. He's fought the best two guys that he's faced. He froze up, and he should have lost both those fights. And everyone says, "What about the George Groves fight?" That was part of the World Boxing Super Series, and in the semi-final against Chris Eubank Jr., George Groves tore his shoulder, and they said to him, "If you can't recover by the summer, then Chris Eubank Jr. will have to step in as a replacement." So George Groves rushed his recovery, was already thinking about retirement, went in for the final to collect his check, didn't look in shape, didn't train properly. He admits to all these things, and Callum Smith beat a very bad version of George Groves. So you can't give him the credit for beating someone that was, in his prime. He wasn't.
Well, and then he fought, what was it, Nikki Hoshkin?
Yeah, he just has a number of those fights as well, Callum, where like he was supposed to kick on and face someone decent and then just kind of drop back to European level. Callum Smith's done that a lot throughout his career, and I think it's going to hurt him against Beterbiev.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. I don't quite understand all the hype on Callum Smith, but I guess they fight the fights for a reason. We'll see what happens. But let me see. We got some comments. New Khan wants to know, how does Boots navigate forward with the new state of play?
Yeah, I remember when you came on my channel, I spoke about how much I love Boots Ennis. He's one of my favorite fighters. But although he's now got a world title, it still feels like he's kind of stuck in this position. And obviously with Crawford and Spence supposed to have a rematch, with Ortiz now moving up to 154 pounds, it feels like one of his kind of rivals and one of the young guns that could spur him on isn't quite there. Maybe that opens the door now for him to fight the likes of Stanionis, and I know there's a lot of talk of him fighting Barrios next, which, whilst I think Boots wins it, Barrios has been on a decent little run, deserves the fight. But for Boots now, he's in such a difficult position where unless it's Terence Crawford he's fighting, everyone's going to hold him to a negative standard, which is unfair on him because he's one of the most talented athletes and fighters in the sport.
Yeah, and I mean, like, apart from Barrios, I mean, there's not really a lot of options for welterweight. I mean, you got what, like Giovanni Santillan, who just won a good fight against Rocha. You got like what, maybe like a Jin Sasaki if he can get a title, maybe he becomes a star in Japan. That could be a fight, but like there's not a ton of options there. I'm really upset, to be honest, because I really feel like, and I don't know what you feel about this, but when Terence Crawford beat Errol Spence. I feel like since he's beat Errol Spence, he kind of started acting like Errol Spence, because I wanted to see Terence against Boots. To me, that was always number one versus number two, and now he don't want to. He's being overly dismissive of Boots. I've never seen him be so overly dismissive of a fighter in his weight class.
Yeah, I completely agree that I think Crawford's kind of, because the rematch was already in the contract, I think he just kind of became comfortable with it's going to be the rematch next. Whereas that first fight was so one-sided that I feel like Crawford could have put it out there into the world that, hey, I don't want that rematch. Actually, I want to go and explore this opportunity, or I need to fight, Jaron Ennis because he's become my manager or whatever. I think that he should have at least explored other options. And it is a little bit frustrating because, like you say, and I'm a little bit disappointed. I know that Crawford got his win, and it's the win that us Crawford fans have always wanted him to get over Spence. But I always really wanted Boots versus Spence because I felt that it was going to be a reversal of Spence versus Brook. I just felt that the young lion was going to come up, step up, and beat the champion. And I always wanted that fight for Boots, but he doesn't even get the sort of gratification of that now, because if he was to go and fight Spence and beat him, it's never going to happen. But if he was to go and do that now, everyone would go, well, Crawford's already knocked him out. So yeah, I do feel like Boots is in a bit of a tough place where he's kind of like 154's got some names, 140's got a load of them, but then he's just kind of sat there in the middle, and the one fight that he should chase, he can't get. So it's like, it's just a difficult place for him right now.
And then you got Devin Haney talking about he wants to go to 47 to fight Mario Barrios, but Devin Haney doesn't want to go fight Jaron Ennis, right? That would be a big. I mean, maybe it is unrealistic, but I'm saying if that ever came to fruition, that'd be probably the biggest fight that could happen from something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like you say, with the likes of, like, to us fight fans, like if he goes and beats, Giovanni Santillan or someone like that, it's a good win. Like, Santillan's a good fighter. But in the grand scheme of things, Boots Ennis is expected to do so much more than that no one will give him the respect it deserves. Like, the win over Romain Villa was a fantastic win, who had just gone and beat Rashidi Ellis, who people put on that kind of, top prospect, top contender level. And he just doesn't really get the credit he deserves for it. So Boots is in a really tough place.
He might just be better off going to like 160 or something like that, trying to become a middleweight champion. Maybe go fight like, I don't know, Charlo, I don't know, Johnny Beck, something, because he's big enough. He's huge. He's a gargoyle at 147.
Yeah, and at 154, there's loads of PBC fighters, like, and I'd pick him over the likes of Fundora and all those guys as well. So, like, yeah, maybe he just has to make that jump. Maybe that's just what he has to do.
Yeah, it is what it is. We got a couple of super chats. El Jefe wants to know. He said, "Women's boxing sucks. Why do you like it?" That's a funny question.
Who's that to? Why do you like it? Is that to me or to you?
I don't know if it's to me or it's to you. I mean, I haven't really covered women's boxing like that recently, but I mean, I don't hate women's boxing, but.
Yeah, I do think the sort of lower fights. I think at the top level, there's some good women's fights. Like when you get a Shields versus Marshall or a Taylor versus Serrano, or Taylor versus Cameron. I think the top of it is good, but I do think that the kind of lower levels of it, it's easier to get to that sort of stage in women's boxing. So you do see lesser fights at the lower level for sure.
I mean, I know, like, just to use an example, I know, like, Sinisa Estrada, she fought Nancy Franco like in her 7th pro fight, and that was like, she's former world champion, and that got her in the rankings in her 7th fight, and that's like a commonality in women's boxing. You could fight someone who was a former world champion who doesn't even have the best record, and you boom, you're right up there. So the talent pool isn't as big.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This one's to you, I guess. Hyro says, "Have you ever thought about getting Rick Glazer on your show?"
Yeah, that must be to me. Yeah, do you know what? Like, he's not someone I've ever had on. I'm interested to see him on your show because, like, reading Twitter and stuff.
Oh
like,
my god,
Rick always seems to be involved in something.
He tweeted something today. Like, he's supposed to come on later tonight, and he tweeted something today where it's like, man, like you had to tweet this today, like, because now I gotta address. I'm gonna have to address it when he comes on later. He tweeted, was it Cameron Duncan? Cameron Duncan passed away, the manager, and he was like, "Good riddance." Like, he's not a good person. I'm like, Jesus. So yeah, but yeah. I mean, are you gonna try to get him on? I guess that's
I mean, after that story, I might debate it a little while longer, but we'll see.
Yeah. As far apart from Rick, is there anybody else maybe that you consider getting on your channel recently? Because I know, like, I know in the past you interviewed Donaire, Nonito Donaire.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of. I spoke to someone recently on my Patreon, which is probably like one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. So, like, I don't know if many people in this chat, you know, do a lot of kind of reading. I don't do any reading unless it's a boxing book. I'll only pick it up if it's boxing related. And the first kind of boxing book I read was Dark Trade by Don McRae, who's a South African boxing writer.
Don McRae, he wrote this article about Isaac Chamberlain a couple years ago. I read it. He's wrote a bunch of books.
Yeah, he writes for one of the big newspapers over here as well. So before any kind of big fight or notable fight in the UK, he'll speak to the main event guys. So whether it be Isaac Chamberlain or someone like that. And I've been a big fan of his over the year, and I got him on my Patreon recently and had a chat with him. So that was kind of cool to talk about his journey and his books and stuff. So he was someone that I've always wanted to get on. There's kind of been other times, you know, I really wanted to at one point to get Teddy Atlas on when I was a lot younger and to kind of speak to him. But
that's crazy because I've met so many people in boxing over the years. I never met Teddy Atlas, and I've always wanted to talk to him.
It's funny because he's so involved in boxing, but he's such a presence in boxing, but you don't like see a lot of him kind of, you know, out and about or at these events and stuff. But I know as well, one of my favorite episodes that you've done on here, you got Tim Bradley on as well. I thought Tim was a great guest.
He's amazing, man. He's like one of the most insightful people in boxing. I know people sometimes feel some type of way about him because he just says what he feels, right? But, but he's great to talk to about the sport.
Yeah, for real. Yeah,
because he's great. He really loved the sport and he walked that path, you know, at the highest level. So it's always good to talk to him.
Yeah, that was one of the episodes you did that I really enjoyed. Yeah, he's good.
Yeah. Okay. One of the last probably fights I'll ask you about, and then I'll probably let you go here in a second. But there's a big fight on Top Rank in that featherweight division. I'm really interested in it because I've seen one of these guys train since before he was pro to now, which is Odabek Komatar versus Raymond Ford, the March 2nd fight for the vacant WBA title. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a big Otabek Kolmatov fan for a long time. What I like about him is a lot of the Uzbek fighters, too many of them have stayed in the Uzbek amateur system for too long. And even the ones that do leave the amateurs, they kind of stay as a group. So the likes of Mjak Madliev, Giasov, Madrimov, they kind of all stayed with each other. So they train with Joel Diaz out in California, but then they go back to Uzbekistan and they kind of don't develop this pro style. But we've seen with Kolmatov, because he went over, to America and he's trained over there and has left the amateur scene behind, he's become a very good fighter. And I have a funny story about Kolmatov. One of my friends was at a boxing event and saw him in person. And he went, "Oh my God, he is huge for featherweight. Like, he is massive." And like Ray Ford has had, whilst he in his last couple of fights, I feel like he's taken that next step. He has had a couple of performances that I feel he's lost. I feel like he could arguably have 2 defeats on his record. There was that fight against Perez and the one against Vasquez as well, which hasn't aged badly because Vasquez moved up in weight and gave Cordina a tough time. But I just think I've seen more of Kolmatov where I've been impressed than I've seen of Ford and been impressed. And Kolmatov is a big, big dude. Like I said, my friend saw him and couldn't believe that he makes 126. So I think he's going to, come through in that fight.
He's absolutely huge, and I've seen him spar countless rounds, and the gas tank that man has. That's why I keep saying when I talk about that fight, it's like Raymond Ford better come and shape that fight. Otherwise, once that fight gets to the 5th, 6th, 7th round, he's gonna be puffing and puffing, ready to get out of there. Because I've just seen it so many times in the gym and even in his fights, like he just builds and builds and builds and builds, and he won't stop coming.
Yeah, and I think landing on Top Rank is great for that fight and both fighters, because I feel like, Top Rank is where the featherweight division's at right now. Obviously, they've got Venado Lopez. Obviously, we saw the fight between Robesi and Espinoza. May see a rematch of that, who knows? But it does feel like that's the place to be as a featherweight right now. So I think that fight's going to get the love it deserves.
No, and I can't wait for it. It's one of the ones I got circled on my calendar. That fight, and then the other one is kind of personal. Maybe who knows how it'll go, but Conor Benn versus Pete Dobson. I know Pete Dobson, so that's kind of why I'm excited about it. But
yeah, I the last live show I did before Christmas, that fight got announced while I was doing the live show. And when someone told me who Conor Benn was fighting, I said, True School Sports is really high on Dobson, because I know he's supposed to fight a Jarko and then was supposed to fight McCormack as well. It's just not happened for him yet. And I know you were very confident in him beating a Jarko. I know Pat McCormack's one of the best amateurs we've ever produced, so I was intrigued to see how that one played out.
McCormack, I think, would have been a tougher fight, but Jarko, I thought he had a chance. This one, I definitely think he's got a chance, because Conor Benn. I remember when he fought Adrian Granados, and Adrian Granados was not even like a mover, and he started moving on Ben, and Ben had some problems finding Adrian Granados, and so I think if it all depends on, I feel, Pete Dobson's condition. If he's really lived that life, as far as sparring, and I think I give him a chance, because I've just seen too many holes in Conor Benn. But look, Matchroom picked him for a reason. He hasn't been under the lights in about a year and a half, so they're banking on that being a factor.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting fight. I don't hold Conor Benn in a high regard either, so I think it's certainly a potential win for Dobson.
Yeah. Hara wants to know from you, Jamie, could you see an undisputed cruiserweight champion? Because now Opataia's out the picture, so maybe these belts do get unified.
It's just the division's so messy right now. Obviously, with Opataia losing the IBF belt, that means that we'll see someone fighting for that title. The WBO is obviously Chris Bidham-Smith. He's tied into a contract with Richard Riakporhe, and then the winner has to fight Lawrence Okoli. So that's that dealt with. The WBA champion, Arsene Gudamarin, is in one of the trickiest contractual situations. He wants to get out of his managerial situation. His manager is not letting him out of that situation.
What's his contractual situation? Like, who's he with? I don't even know about that, to be honest.
He's with Y12 Boxing in France, which is kind of like the biggest managerial company over in France. And he wants to get out of that situation because he's been offered some big fights elsewhere, but they've kind of kept him in France. And he's got a mandatory against Uniel Dorticus, who's obviously a great cruiserweight. It'd be a great fight, but right now they just can't resolve the contractual situation, so he's in a bit of a mess. And then the WBC champion, Noel McCarlian, who's just beat Ilunga Makabu, it does feel like he's more open to making some of those fights happen, so maybe we see him. But right now they're just, in some divisions, you look at the champions and go, yeah, an undisputed could happen there. Cruiserweight's one of the ones where it's just a little bit too messy at the minute.
Too much politics, too much business, that's interfering with that happening. So
yeah, absolutely.
The belts might need to fragment again, and we might need to go another 3 years before we get, potential for that.
Yeah, I mean, the cruiserweight division needed 2 World Boxing Super Series tournaments to get, anywhere with undisputed. So yeah, I think it needs one again for it to happen.
Yeah, hopefully, Wasserman and Kamosa AG can come back to the sport and bring the tournament back. Because I missed it. I actually missed the tournament. I think that I don't remember the exact reason why they discontinued it, but I do miss.
I mean, especially with Saudi now, coming into the picture. I don't see why they couldn't be the ones that front the money for it. I know that the Callum Smith George Groves final went to Saudi Arabia, and everyone at the time thought it was a little bit strange, and it was because they were willing to put the money up for it. So I don't know. Maybe the Saudis can make a super tournament. If anyone can, they can. So
listen, Saudis, make the tournament. Bring it back, Saudis.
Yeah, for real.
Jamie, this one's for you, Jamie. Newcom wants to know from you. We're in a 1 fight per year era of boxing. How much extra boost should we weigh pound for pound and fighter of the year debate guys who fight twice instead of once a year?
Yeah, I'm someone that's a big advocate for activity. I always felt like fighter of the year, you never just used to get it off the strength of one victory. And I feel like the pandemic kind of changed that a little bit. Like 2018, when Usyk got it, he beat Gassiev, Bradis, and Bellew in 1 year. And then 2019, Canelo beat Danny Jacobs, and they said, well, he needs another big win to get fighter of the year. And he goes and beats Kovalev, moves up 2 weight divisions. And back then, it felt like you needed those wins. Kind of 2020, where we saw Fury against Wilder and Lopez against Lomachenko, that kind of changed the narrative a little bit. And then since then, it's kind of been, if you have one good win, maybe that's just enough. But I'm very much a sort of activity person. I feel like you need a couple of good wins. That's why I've given it to Inoue over Crawford. I think Crawford maybe has a stronger win overall, but Inoue, starting the year with no belts. And kind of fight of the year conversations for me is always about, okay, in January, what did you have? And by the end of the year, what did you have? And a couple of years ago, I gave it to Stephen Fulton because he had no world titles. He beat 2 unbeaten world champions and ended the year with 2 belts. I'm very much the same with Inoue, who went undisputed in 2022. But 2023, if he sat there in January, he's got no belts moving up to super bantamweight. By the end of it, he's got all 4 of them, and he's beat 2 unified champions to get it. So for me, when I look at the fighter of the year, I always look at where were you at the start of the year and where were you at the end of the year.
That's definitely a healthy way to look at it. Yeah. For me personally, I have a hot take on fighter of the year. I actually have an Oshaki Foster as fighter of the year because he wasn't a world champion, and then he fought Ray Vargas in San Antonio. With a lot of Mexicans and stuff. That's always hard for the American fighters to fight a Mexican fighter in somewhere like San Antonio, Arizona, something like that. He won that fight. Then he came in as the B-side as a champion to fight Rocky Hernandez. In Mexico, which is Eddie Hearn was basically trying to it was supposed to be a coronation of his Mexican champion, and Oshaki wound up stopping him in one of the best, most exciting fights of the year. So I feel like the fact that he wasn't a world champion, and then he won two fights that a lot of people are picking him to lose. I feel like that should hold some weight, but he's not going to sell the magazines like a Crawford or Inoue has, so he's not going to get the consideration. But that's why
I think that's admirable. That's very much the same of my logic. Like, what strides have you taken necessarily? And that's why I said in my fighter of the year conversation, whilst I gave it to Inoue, there's guys that don't have the wins of Crawford and Inoue or Haney or someone like that to get in the conversation. But look at someone like Tim Zhu at the start of the year, who, if you'd have said at the start of the year he's going to fight Charlo, a lot of people would go, well, Charlo's going to win that. You get to the end of the year and he's ran through Harrison, he's run through Mendoza, who's coming off a great win. You kind of look at someone like that that's taken big strides, or I don't know, maybe like a David Benavidez, who at the start of the year, he's not really on Canelo's tail. He's there, but he hasn't done quite enough yet. Goes and beats Caleb Plant, goes and beats Demetrius Andrade, and he's there on the toes. And I feel like fighters like that, Sabril Mateus, who didn't have a world title at the start of the year, then beats 2 unbeaten contenders and ends the year with a world title and 2 of his best wins. I'm similar to you. It's about where the jumps you've made in that year rather than who you beat necessarily.
And if you really want to get into the whole activity part of fighter of the year, then that's where a guy like even like a Joseph Parker should probably get the consideration, because he had 4 fights. He had 4 fights and then ends the year upsetting Deontay Wilder.
Yeah, I'm very much like you. It's what you did. How often did you do it?
Okay. Shout out to Barry Lilly for the super chat. He says, "Big up to Brendan and PPB. The Aussies are taking over boxing."
Big up Barry. He supports my channel as well, so always got to shout him out.
Yeah, shout out to Barry. I love the Aussies. They're definitely, I think, in a bit of a golden era right now for them.
I think they're in their best period for a long time. I think Jai Opetaia is the best cruiserweight in the world and one of the best fighters in the world. Tim Zhu he's going on leaps and bounds. He's not just Costa Zhu's son anymore. He's getting better with each performance. And Sam Goodman was actually my breakthrough fighter of the year. Henri, Salim, the TJ Dehenny win has aged really well because he's gone over to Japan recently and got a big win. So Sam Goodman's someone else that I think you're looking at Australia right now and thinking, yeah, there's multiple world champions soon to come.
You got Sky Nicholson, who's making a lot of waves in women's boxing as well. I know Michael Zarafa just got ordered to fight for the world title against Lara. So, the Aussies, up the Aussies.
Yeah, Alex Winwood as well, down at minimum weight, speaking about that division that I love. He's a good fighter as well.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about him. I just seen his name in the rankings when I was learning about the Iokas. I'm like, okay, Winwood. I remember seeing his name.
Yeah, he's getting there.
Okay. Well, I don't want to hold you up too much longer, Jamie. But before I let you go, is there like any final message you want to give to the boxing fans? You know, people that are watching, people that are gonna come across the video later on, just about your channel and all the wonderful things you got going on in your channel.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me on, bro. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll make it more regularly. We won't leave it a year this time. We'll get you on mine, and I'll come back on yours sooner than.
It might got to be a bi-monthly thing, at least once a month. You know.
Yeah, we'll make sure to do it, and hopefully I'll get out to the US at some point as well, and we cross paths. But yeah, fingers crossed that can happen.
If you come to the US, man, I mean, there's a lot of places to go in the US. I don't know if a big fight will ever come to the South Florida area, but if you ever do come to like the South Florida area, I'll show you around Miami and Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. And if anyone, enjoys kind of my thoughts today, Punch Perfect Boxing, always welcoming new subscribers over 2024. Going to continue doing the same stuff. So keep supporting boxing and keep supporting both our channels as well.
Yeah, keep doing that, and make sure you go run up Jamie's subscriber count, because I know you're closing on that 10,000. You're close to that 10,000.
That's the goal for 2024. That's the number we want to hit.
And that's always a big number. It's a big number, 10,000. But I'm trying to get to 100K. It's tough.
Yeah. Once you hit that 10K, it starts to speed up. So
yeah,
need to get over that line.
Compounds over time. So yeah, Jamie, appreciate you, man. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
All right.